Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony. As a member of the conference committee, I'm looking forward to vote for the strongest set of sanctions because I see Ahmadinejad was largely dismissive of Resolution 1929. And in part, it's because I think we roar like a lion and bite like a puppy. And we need to change that dynamic in my mind. So no matter, however, what sanctions regime we have, there's really a real question of enforcement. Any law is only as good as that which is enforced. And so I look at the UN resolution, and the financial sections in the resolution appear to be weak. For example, only one new bank was added to the list of sanctioned entities. Even here in the United States, the sanctions announced last week added only one bank to the list of those sanctioned. 1929 specifically notes the need to exercise vigilance over transactions involving the Central Bank of Iran. So I'd like to ask you, was this based on evidence that the central bank has been involved in facilitating Iran's illicit nuclear program and its support for terrorism? And how does the Treasury Department intend to designate the central bank of Iran as a supporter of Iran's proliferation activities?
Senator Menendez, the current situation with respect to the Central Bank of Iran in the United States, as I think you know, is that already it is forbidden to do any business if you're a U.S. person with the Central Bank of Iran. Every financial institution in the United States would be violating our law. It would be a crime to do business with the Central Bank of Iran. With respect to banking sanctions, and frankly with respect to all sanctions, we have by far the toughest sanctions regime of any country in the world. You're right, we did designate another bank last week, but that brings our list to 16 Iranian banks that we have designated either for facilitating Iran's proliferation activities, in the case of 15 of them, or terrorism in the case of one of them. So we think that we will continue to enforce our sanctions regime very, very vigorously. Those financial institutions who have violated our sanctions laws have found themselves on the other end of very, very tough enforcement actions. Both Lloyd's and Credit Suisse found themselves on the other side of fines of over $300 million in the case of Lloyd's and over $500 million in the case of Credit Suisse for facilitating Iranian transactions among other sanctions violations.
I understand about the interaction with the central bank. The question is, does the Treasury Department intend to designate the Central Bank of Iran as a supporter of Iran's proliferation activities?
I can't say right now whether we will do that.
All right. Now let me ask Mr. Burns, enforcement. On July the 9th of 2008, you testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee that the State Department was investigating Norway's Statoil for a possible violation of the Iran Sanctions Act. For the record, that company was fined $10 million by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Justice Department for violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act by bribing Iranian government officials in order to receive a contract. What was the result of that investigation from the State Department?
I'll just make two comments, Senator. First, it's important to note that Statoil announced shortly after that testimony that they were not going to engage in new investment in Iran, and they began to wind down their operations there. So I think that's an example of where, the aggressive diplomatic use of the Iran Sanctions Act has actually helped produce a result. On the broader issue of the kind of problematic cases that we've talked about through the course of this administration, the State Department has completed its internal review of those cases. Secretary Clinton promised that she would do this expeditiously at the start of the administration. There are a number of cases, less than 10, in which it appears that there may have been violations of the ISA. Most of those appear to involve activities that have stopped, in other words, involving companies that have pulled out of business in Iran. But there are a couple that appear to be ongoing. The next stage after the State Department has completed its internal review is, in accordance with the delegation of authority to Secretary Clinton, is to consult with other agencies, which we will do expeditiously, about what actions are appropriate here, and then the Secretary will make her determination. So just as Secretary Clinton promised, we're moving ahead vigorously in this administration.
Well, I respect that, except that we haven't sanctioned anybody.
Uh,
We can keep doing a review and a review and a review, and we're coming to the problematic cases, and then we go through the problematic cases, and now you're telling me that there's a group of problematic cases that are still problematic because they seem to be still engaged in Iran. And at the end of the day, I see, DOE has a series of informations about companies doing business in violation of the Iran sanctions. I don't understand how it is that the SEC can make these determinations, that the Department of Energy has these determinations, but we don't seem to come to a conclusion at the State Department for sanctions, which makes me wonder whether we really have the desire to implement the law and to enforce it, because otherwise, no wonder Ahmadinejad goes ho-hum to the resolutions. It means nothing.
Well, Senator, it's a fair question. The proof will be in our actions. As I said, we've completed the internal State Department review, which is a significant step, and as the Secretary committed, we'll move forward quickly on those cases that appear to involve
Is the failure of the
ongoing
State
activity.
Department to make even a single determination of the a result of manpower problems, or simply that you're not choosing to make a final determination for some political or diplomatic reason?
No, Senator, we're going to enforce the law. As I said, we've moved through and completed the internal review. It's not an issue of manpower. It is true these are complicated issues because you got to sift through a lot of information, some of it inaccurate because the Iranians have their own interests sometimes in exaggerating and broadcasting in the press stories about contracts that turn out, not to be accurate in the end. So, as I said, the proof will be in our actions, and we're moving ahead expeditiously on this.
Well, I hope we have a cop on the beat, not asleep on the switch.